Hey, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. I'm going to give you the most important piece of advice today that I could ever possibly give you. And I think in terms of avoiding problems and its applicability to the most people, this is the most important thing that I can tell you as an attorney. And that is never co-sign a loan for anyone. Never co-sign a loan for anyone. Now, I know some of you are going to say, Steve, never? Okay, there might be exceptions to this, but the exceptions are so small and so rare that you need to go through this entire thought process before you co-sign a loan so that you avoid getting into the trouble that you can get into co-signing a loan. So I'm just going to tell you right now that in the field of law I practice, which is lemon law, I deal with automobile purchases all the time. I read, loan contracts and purchase agreements and applications for title and all these documents over and over and over again. And one of the things that causes the most grief when it comes to automobile purchases is people who've co-signed loans for others, not understanding what they're getting themselves into. So I was kind of surprised they hadn't done a video on this yet. I think I may have mentioned it once or twice, but I also wrote articles about it. In fact, I'll put a link in the comment in the description below about an article I wrote for Opposite Lock years ago, titled, in essence, "Never Co-Sign a Loan for Anyone." So what we're talking about, of course, is someone goes into a car dealership and they want to buy a car, whether it's a used car or a brand new car or a late model used car. It's a car that they cannot afford to pay for with cash. So they say, I would like to take out a loan and purchase this car. And they say, oh, great, give us your social security number, we'll run a credit check on you. And of course, the credit check machine goes off like a pinball machine. And they come back and they go, we're really sorry, but your double-digit credit score will not allow you to actually borrow a car. In fact, you're this close to being ejected from our lot. But they said, but hey, do you know somebody who could co-sign the loan for you? And the person thinks and they go, let me think now. I could ask a parent, I could ask a brother, I could ask a cousin, I could ask an uncle, I could ask a grandparent. And here's the thing. In 27 years of practicing law, I've seen all of this. I've literally seen someone who co-signed a loan for their spouse. That makes sense to me. I've seen someone who co-signed a loan for their child. That didn't work out. I've seen someone co-sign a loan for a grandchild. That really didn't work out. And I've seen people co-sign loans for friends, which is the dumbest thing you can do on earth. And that never works out. But here's the problem. Most people don't understand what they're doing when they're co-signing a loan. And a lot of people think, well, I'm vouching for them, right? No, you are agreeing personally to pay that loan back if this person doesn't do it. And most loan documents these days are required to carry a warning on them to the co-signer that tells you basically, yes, you are now on the hook just as much as the other person. And it's scarier than that because if they want to, they can chase you first for the money. So let me tell you, this problem is so widespread that the Federal Trade Commission got involved. And when federal agencies get involved trying to straighten something out, two things. One is it's a serious problem, and two, you know that they didn't do anything to actually solve the problem. So co-signing a loan is actually something the Federal Trade Commission has written about and also has, like I said, enacted laws regarding. But it says, what do you do if a friend or relative asks you to co-sign a loan? Before you say yes, think about the obligations involved and how they may affect your finances and creditworthiness. When you agree to co-sign a loan, you're taking a risk that the lender wouldn't take. That's a great way of putting it. So when you co-sign a loan, the lender must spell out your obligations in the co-signer's notice, which does say, and by the way, I've bought many cars. I've actually leased a couple cars also. And, I've seen the documents. I know I know what the documents look like. They throw a flurry of documents at you that if you actually sat and read them word for word, it would take you about a day and a half. And so most people don't read 98% of it. They glance to make sure that the boxes, that have the numbers in them across the Truth in Lending Act form, that those are correct. The down payment's correct, the price is correct, the interest rate is correct. I know people who miss that too, though. And then they'll glance to the bottom, and they'll just sign. Oh, here's a signature line. Sign, and they sign there. And directly beneath the signatory line for the co-signer, it'll say things like, "You are being asked to guarantee this debt. Think carefully before you do. If the borrower does not pay the debt, you will have to. Be sure you can afford to pay if you have to, and that you want to accept this responsibility." It can also say you may have to pay up to the full amount of the debt if the borrower does not pay. You may also have to pay late fees or collection costs, which increase this amount. And then the creditor can collect this debt from you without first trying to collect from the borrower. And that's what most people don't understand. So you co-sign the loan for your nephew, and your nephew gets in his hot new sports car and disappears. And 35 days later, after he's defaulted, the lender contacts you and says, hey, you're in default on this loan. What are you going to do about it? And you go, shouldn't you contact my nephew? We tried. But the point is that they can come after you first. They don't have to go after the nephew first. They can come after you first. And in fact, they will come after you first because the person that you co-signed for had bad credit. They're probably not collectible. Okay? And so you're collectible. That's why they got you to co-sign the loan. So it's kind of like, who's the sucker in this room? Who's co-signing the loan? Raise your hand. So the creditor can use the same collection methods against you that can be used against the borrower, including suing you, possibly garnishing your wages, and if this debt is ever in default, that will become part of your credit record. And so keep in mind that there are some states where they've got to try to collect first from the other person, but that's not true in all states. And chances are, it won't be true in your state. Let's not get into math here. Let's just understand that I'm trying to make a point here. So there might be times that you want to co-sign a loan. Okay? Your fiance wants to buy a car and you're reasonably certain that the marriage is going to hold despite all mathematical odds. So you have to ask yourself, can you afford to pay the loan? Can you afford to pay it? Because if whoever you're co-signing for stops making payments, you got to start making payments. So remember, if you are asked to pay and you can't, you can be sued. Oh, and by the way, this debt that you're taking on as co-signer is real debt. A lot of people assume, well, if I co-sign for them, the debt goes on their credit report. It goes on yours too. Why not? You're on the hook for it. Even if you're not asked to repay the debt, your liability for the loan may keep you from getting other credit. That's what I was just getting at. Creditors will consider the co-signed loan as one of your obligations. They look at debt to income ratios and so on, or torque ratios. Before you pledge property to secure the loan, like your car, furniture, or jewelry, make sure you understand the consequences. If the borrower defaults, you could lose these items. I don't really know where that comes from. I've never heard of anybody pledging property to buy a car, but I guess they put it in here because it happened to somebody. And then you might want to ask the creditor to calculate the amount you might owe. But you know, if you get the Truth in Lending Act form, you should be able to see how much you might owe. That's not going to be good. And then ask the creditor to agree in writing to notify you if the borrower misses a payment or the terms on the loan change. And again, they may or may not have to do that. It's based on the contract you're signing. And make sure you get copies of all the important papers. But again, this is co-signing 101. You sit down to co-sign for somebody else. They get to drive the car. The car will possibly even be titled in their name, and yet you could be on the hook for the entire loan if they default. And, let me give you some nightmare scenarios, things I've actually heard happen, okay? Somebody co-signs a loan for a stepchild, okay? They married somebody who brought kids with them to the marriage. They co-signed a loan for a stepchild, and then there was a falling out amongst the parents to the point they got a divorce. The spouse of the stepchild now hates the former spouse, and the child of the spouse or stepchild of the ex-spouse decides to stop making payments. Why should I make payments to that person who is mean to my mother and or father? So next thing you know, there's a rift in the family that goes right through everything, including that loan contract. So former stepchild no longer makes payments in the car, just driving around there with impunity. Oh, and stops making insurance payments on the car. Why pay for insurance on the car? It ain't my car, it's somebody else's car. Then they get in an accident and total the car. And that car, of course, was collateral on the loan that you co-signed. So you get the notice from the bank that says, we're coming to collect from you now because the car that got totaled that you co-signed for had no insurance on it. And that lack of insurance means that the insurance company won't pay for it. So now we need you to pay off the balance of the loan. and we're coming after you because you're a collectible and the other person that you co-sign for is not collectible. I've heard of that happening, and it happens. And I hear horror stories, and the horror stories are always, I co-signed the loan as a favor to this person. I had fond feelings towards this person. This person and I thought we were family. And now they've fallen off the face of the earth, and now the bank says I owe all this money. Well, the bank says it because it's true. You do owe that money. You agreed to that when you signed the form saying, I understand as a co-signer here, I am as on the hook as the other person, and even more so because my credit's better than theirs. Okay? So I could go on and on with the scenarios here and explain to you how things can go wrong. The problem, of course, is it's kind of like the divorce attorney. If he was to conduct your wedding ceremony and tell you everything that might go wrong with your marriage, nobody wants to hear that. Okay? But it might be handy to know. So before you sign the documents, when someone else is buying the car and you're co-signing for them, put the blinders on for a split second and tell yourself, if this person here, for whatever reason, defaults on this loan, it could get very ugly for me because they're going to come chasing after me. And the bad part, of course, of that is you don't even have the car. So you don't even get the benefit from this loan. Someone else benefits from the loan, but they're chasing you. So that's a problem. One thing I've also always believed, and I understand that there are people who might disagree with me on this one, but you should try to live within your means. And if you can't afford to buy a car, and you can't afford to somehow prove that you can make the payments, perhaps you should buy a little bit less of a car. However, the other problem I have is if somebody gets you on the hook for a co-signed loan, it kind of disincentivizes the person who's taking out the loan because it's no skin off their nose if they default. They had bad credit to begin with. So if they default, just another day, another dark day of bad credit. So what, But for them to default doesn't affect them as much as it's going to affect you. And so you always want to have the party most on the hook to be the one that's most incentivized. Otherwise, things don't go as planned. So the person that you co-signed for, who's all happy they got their shiny new car because, grandpa signed for it or their uncle or aunt signed for it, hey, that's great. You all have a kumbaya moment out in the parking lot. But once that kid drives the car to school a couple times or, bangs into some shopping carts, not so shiny anymore, and suddenly realizes he can't make a payment or two, the touchy-feely happiness of all this might be gone out the window. So I really think there's a problem with disincentivizing the person who is borrowing the money and getting the benefits of it, but without having that debt hanging over their heads the way it ought to be. So the other thing to remember is when someone comes to you and asks you to co-sign a loan, there's actually no good answer. Because if you say, yes, I'll co-sign the loan, everything I just told you is going to happen to you. Just mark my words, it's going to happen to you. On the other hand, if you say, no, I won't co-sign the loan, now they're mad at you. Why won't you co-sign my loan? I can't believe, I asked Grandpa, it's not like he's doing anything. Grandpa just sits around all day long and watches Matlock. Why won't he co-sign my loan? And so it's sad that people will put their friends, relatives, or neighbors in these positions. But unfortunately, you need to actually find a way to say no as nicely as you can. And say, hey, don't ask me. Maybe you should ask somebody else. Maybe you should hint that your finances aren't as good as you've led them to believe all these years. Whatever. But try to say no. Because I can tell you that co-signing the loan or not co-signing the loan could cost a portion of the goodwill you have with somebody. But I'm here to tell you, if you co-sign the loan for a roommate, and I've heard of that before, or you co-sign the loan for a friend of yours, okay, there's a very good chance that your friendship will last for the length of time of the first payment on that loan. And it could very quickly go off the cliff thereafter. And I know people, I've spoken to people who told me, Steve, I co-signed the loan for the guy who was my roommate and best friend, and now we hate each other. Because he stopped making payments, the vehicle got repossessed, he disappeared, and they started chasing me, and it ruined my credit. That's too bad. So when your roommate asks you, can you co-sign a loan for me? Unless that roommate's wearing a ring that you gave him or her at a ceremony in front of other people where you swore till the ends of the earth you would do things like co-sign each other's loans, you gotta say no. Gotta say no. So the most important thing, and this is the takeaway from today's video, someone asks you to co-sign for a loan. No, don't do it. Or as I said in my opposite locker article, run. Don't even respond. Just run. Run away. Run away. But I'm being facetious. Obviously, if you co-sign a loan for your child, that might be one of the risks you take as being a parent. Or if you co-sign the loan for a spouse, fiance, things of that nature, again, if you have faith in humanity, do it. But keep in mind, as the co-signer, your credit score might be affected, your debt to income ratio will be affected, and when the loan goes into default, they will come after you first if they can, and they probably can. So that's why I tell you, when someone asks you to co-sign a loan, just say no. Questions or comments, as always, fire them below. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.